This is Casey Rynerson, and this is my chapter summaries for EDL 850 School Law from our book, A Teacher's Guide to School Law. In Chapter 1, Control of Public Schools, I did not realize that school board members are recognized as state officials. Prior to reading this chapter, I thought they were local officials since they were chosen to that position by the citizens and the communities that they live in. They are, however, considered to be state officials because they execute state and federal laws as well as adhere to state board policies in regards to operating public schools. And that goes along with standard number 4. Chapter 2, Instructional and Curriculum Standards. One thing that I found interesting from Chapter 2 was that courts continue to rule against schools who use physical punishment for poor academic punishments. As an educator, I would hope that this is common sense for all my colleagues. School officials should make sure that school policies are followed when academic penalties are being used, and I think this would be a very big issue as a future administrator, and that's standard 3. Chapter 3, Religion in Public Schools. It's very interesting to me because I am a Christian, and we teach in a small school in southwest Kansas. The book says public school teachers should refrain from the use of religious symbols or pictures, even in conjunction with discussing the various holidays. This definitely caught my attention because I've been in numerous classrooms, both at the school I teach in and also in other schools, that teachers do in fact have religious symbols in classrooms in regards to their beliefs, not necessarily pushing their views or opinions on anybody else, but just they are there. I think this is very debated and controversial, and I think it does vary from different districts to different districts. Chapter 4, the students, the law, and the public schools. I learned a little bit about freedom of expression in this. We read about this in the news very frequently, people saying things that get them into trouble. I thought this was interesting that our text stated, to justify prohibition of a particular form of expression, there must be something more than a mere desire to avoid the discomfort and unpleasantness associated with an unpopular view. I thought this was interesting because sometimes as teachers and as human beings in general, we do get our feathers ruffled sometimes very easily, and we say things that we are going to later regret, and we do things that sometimes we later regret. And I think a lot of times this has to do with freedom of expression. Chapter 5 was due process and student safety. It talked a lot about due process, and it also is what I did some of my topic presentations over. And so I learned a lot about due process and exactly what goes along with that. I think it can be a very difficult thing for administrator because you have to make sure every T is crossed and every I is dotted, and that you have documentation for everything that goes on. They have to make sure that every policy is followed correctly to protect themselves and also the school, according to Essex. And the essential element of the due process is fundamental fairness, which means a fair hearing and a fair impartial judgment. And the biggest thing there is fundamental fairness. They have to be fair across the board. Chapter 6 was liability and student records. I learned in Chapter 6 that students who are 18 may inspect confidential and also challenge the accuracy of the information that is being held in their personal file at school. I did not realize this. I thought that only parents or guardians could request that access, and then students could look at it after parents had accessed it from the administrators. But I was wrong, and the fact that if a student is 18, they can go ahead and ask for access to their personnel file. Chapter 7 deals with individuals with disabilities. The thing that I found interesting and informational in Chapter 7 dealt with the PP team. This is a planning and placement team. We had an issue a couple years ago in our school where a student with a disability was removed. I did not know a lot about the issue at the time. They were in one of my classes, and I was just told that they would no longer be there. It was none of my information, so I didn't ask any further. If I had, I don't believe I would have been told anything, again, because it was not my information. Looking back now and reading about this PPT team, I can understand a little bit more what went on, and it does make a little bit clearer sense to that. Chapter 8 deals with the teacher and the school liability. I was surprised to see that false imprisonment was talked about in our textbook in Chapter 8. I would like to think that as a teacher, any logical teacher would know that this is not acceptable. And then I went to YouTube for another assignment, and I was horribly wrong. I saw a teacher in Texas that had actually locked a student in a cage from a shop classroom because of the way they're behaving, and this is absolutely unacceptable. Chapter 9 deals with discrimination in employment. What I learned in Chapter 9 dealt with the qualifications for employment. Our text stated, any individual with a disability is qualified under ADA if, with or without reasonable accommodations, he or she can perform the core functions of the employment position held or desired to be held. I had never even really thought about this. I mean, I've been in different places where there are people with disabilities performing jobs to the fullest of their ability and doing a great job. I'd never actually thought about the process of hiring someone with a disability. And this had to do with standard number 2. Chapter 10 dealt with teacher freedoms. And the one thing that I found was very interesting and controversial in Chapter 10 was speech outside of the school environment. As teachers, we have the right afforded to us by the First Amendment to speak on issues that interest us and our community, even though the content of our speech may not be popular with school district officials. As a teacher, even though I have this right, I believe that we, and I personally, should be very careful because we are held to a different standard just because we are teachers. And people are always listening, always looking out for what we're saying and what we're doing. Chapter 11 dealt with tenure, dismissal, and collective negotiations. The thing that I found new to me in this chapter was the financial exigency, or the abolition of positions. And again, I did a couple assignments over this, and prior to this course I did not know much about this controversial topic. Through my studying and research, I learned how the process works, what it takes to make the process both legal and ethical as a teacher and an administrator, and also the district responsibilities. Thank you.